What's up, guys? Hey, it's Clint Coons here, and in this video I'm going to talk about the 8 mistakes real estate investors make when it comes to their estate plan. Okay, let's get started. All right, so when it comes to estate planning, it's the last thing people tend to focus on, especially real estate investors. I mean, we understand the importance of limited liability companies. We want to reduce our risk exposure, so we go out there, we create the LLCs, we create this plan to ensure that we don't lose our assets in the event of a lawsuit. But then what happens? You unexpectedly pass away and everything's in your own name and it all starts to crumble. Everything you've been building up today can fall apart within one generation if you're not thinking about your estate plan, your succession. So what I want to cover is these 8 crucial mistakes that I see time and time again for real estate investors when it comes to putting together their estate plan. And it's because they have a lack of knowledge. They haven't thought these things through. So what is mistake number 1, in my opinion, when it comes to being a real estate investor? First mistake is not having a living trust. Okay? This is the first mistake people make. They keep their assets in their own name. So let's say you created a bunch of limited liability companies over here. You have these LLCs that you set up, and you're the member of them. Well, what occurs if you pass away? These things have to go through probate in order to transfer on the ownership of the LLC so somebody can step in and start controlling it, collecting the rents, dealing with the property manager and the like. So when you own assets in your own name and you don't have a living trust, you have to go through the probate process, which can drag on and take untold amount of time. When my grandmother passed away, my uncle stepped in and she had 2 pieces of property and 5 bank accounts, and it took him 4.5 years. And he bled the estate to the tune of 70 grand. So as you can see, when you go through probate, it leaves a lot open. It gives people opportunities to do things they shouldn't otherwise be doing. So the first thing you need is a living trust. Now the second mistake people make, if they get the first one right, is they fail to fund their living trust. I'll just put LT there. So you have your LLCs and you're the member of them. You create the living trust, but then you don't assign your interest, transfer your interest into that living trust to make sure that the living trust now controls your LLCs so you can avoid probate. Now the third mistake, and again, after number 1, these aren't in any particular order. They're just areas that I know are a concern that I see time and time again. So the third mistake is that you've set up a living trust, right? So you're in control of your assets that are held inside of this living trust. But when you pass on, then you have a successor trustee that steps in and is going to control these assets. So the mistake that I find real estate investors make is not selecting the right trustee after they're gone. Okay, so what do I mean? So you have real estate assets. You need to appoint someone who understands real estate, or at a bare minimum, understands entities and what they need to do with those LLCs to transfer control to someone else. And I'll explain that here. This is going to be my next point. So the successor trustee provision in your living trust, think of that person in their knowledge base and their skill set when you're choosing them to make sure that they're going to be comfortable with the types of assets you hold. You should be talking to them, checking out their experience, seeing if they're doing the same things you are, because that successor trustee is going to be in a very important position to handle the distribution of your estate, or better yet, as I'm about to share with you, hold on to it to build generational wealth. And if they're not up to the task, then all this work is going to fall apart. So your successor trustee, you need to vet them. The fourth thing that you need to look at, successor manager of real estate LLCs. Okay, so you've got real estate in limited liability companies. Who's going to actually run the day-to-day, deal with the property managers, know what to look for, know if you get a repair order that comes in, whether or not it's bogus or it's for real? That person needs to have real estate experience. So you can have a successor trustee that can handle the distributions and has some sense of the business entities and what to look for, but You should also name in your trust who that successor manager will be for those limited liability companies, and that the successor trustee is going to ensure that the manager takes over when you're no longer here to control it. Because again, people that try to run rental real estate and they're not familiar with it can find themselves in a situation where they're way over their heads, and then the properties, you lose the properties, or they're not producing the type of income that you intended, they get sold, and then all again your efforts that you've put forth have gone to waste. So make sure you've chosen the right successor manager. All right, now the fifth thing, okay, holding these assets in trust. All right. You're going to leave it to your beneficiaries, your real estate. How do you plan to leave this to your beneficiaries? Maybe you have 2 children, maybe you have 3 children. Okay, are you going to split it up, 1 property per child, or are you going to divide up the LLCs amongst all 3, and so each of them become a 1/3 owner? This is critical when it comes to planning for your estate. If you bring all 3 kids, okay, so let's say I have an LLC set up here, all right, and it's part of my estate, and let's assume that you had 9 of these, and you pass away and you say, all right, I want to have each child own a 1/3 interest in these LLCs. And so you split all of them up, 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. I assume you can see the complexity and the problems that could arise in this scenario, because now what you have is you have 3 individuals that have to agree on things in order to get something done. Well, maybe you want that, but what happens when one of them passes away and now they leave it to their 2 kids? Now all of a sudden you have 4 individuals that we're talking to on how those LLCs are going to be run. So if you plan to leave your assets outright to a beneficiary, and you had 3 kids and you had 9 LLCs, try to figure out the approximate values. And try to have the trustee give instructions to the trustee to make sure they're all equal, and then give 1 LLC per person. Or maybe you talk to the kids ahead of time to determine which properties they would want, and then you allocate those properties, again, making sure it's equal to your beneficiaries. Another option you could consider is holding the assets in trust. All right, and so what this means is that you spent a lot of time building this up. Why allow that next generation or the generation that comes behind it to go in and sell them and take the money and go out and buy fancy cars? Because it kind of defeats the purpose. Real estate can create generational wealth. It can create income for multiple generations, but in order to do that, you have to hold it in trust so that beneficiaries do not have the ability to sell off those assets. So you may consider holding it in your living trust for multiple generations, so it's held there and it'll make distributions of the income, but the assets themselves that produce the income will not be sold. So that brings me to my 6th point, which is guidance on distributions. Okay, so you need to think this through on how the assets are going to be distributed to the beneficiaries. So what can happen here is that when you have those assets there, do you want them to receive the money outright, or do you want to hold money back? See, people tend to think, well, it generates $1,200 a month in rental income, I'm going to take the $1,200 right out. When in reality, you should be leaving extra money in there to cover those unforeseen expenses, like a roof repair, or when someone moves out and you have to do the rehab on the property because the tenant trashed it. Because if you don't have enough reserves left inside of that limited liability company, then what would happen is you have to go to the beneficiaries and ask them to recontribute the funds. Or if they are unwilling to do it, then you can create some real problems here. So guidance on how distributions are going to be made is crucial when you're running your or when you're setting up your estate plan. Now the 7th one kind of goes hand in hand in here is leave cash for CapEx, okay, and expenses. So I've seen estates where they do this. We're going to hold all the LLCs in trust, okay, for the beneficiaries, and so they're going to check off number 5, and they got guidance on the distributions, but then they distribute all the cash to the kids, the beneficiaries. What does that do? It leaves the trust essentially dry. And so if you have a major expense come up with one of these LLCs that are held in the trust, then you don't have the cash to cover the expense. So I would argue that what you should do is, value up your properties, figure out what a reasonable amount is for reserves, and have the trust. So you have, all these LLCs like this held in this trust. Have the trust keep some cash always on reserve to cover something that's unforeseen. So that has to be held inside of there. And so you seed fund that from your cash reserves initially, and then from there it'll just grow in and on its own. And then the last thing, number 8, which I think is really important, one probably equally as important as number 1, leave info for successor trustee, okay, on if you have PM, property managers, utilities, tenants, all that. Create a list. Keep that list up to date. Because when you're no longer here, they need to know, hey, where's the bank account for that LLC? Who's the property manager that handles the property in that limited liability company? Where are the utilities? If you're the one serving as your own property manager, what are the tenants' names? How do I get in contact with them? Because these are all the things the people you leave behind are going to have to handle, and you don't want to make them to have to go searching and calling people up and just asking questions. Hey, did you know my parents? I think they own this property in a limited liability company. You may have dealt with them. That's not where they should be. This should all be spelled out for them. So here's 8 things that I think are really important if you are a real estate investor that you should incorporate into your estate planning. If you'd like to set up a strategy session to discuss creating an estate plan, a living trust, we would like to do that with you. All you have to do is go into the show notes, click on that link, schedule a strategy session, and we can talk to you about how it would be to set up your own estate plan using these 8 things here that I think are crucial for every real estate investor. Take care.